Maybe better to put it on the first row, just in case. Oh, okay.
We're supposed to be starting right now. Oh, it's already 1:30. I know. Just trying to finish up this. Just good. Good afternoon. I think we are ready to get started. This is the Netconf working group. If this is not the session you wanted to be in, this is a good time to exit.
Okay. So this is an IETF meeting. We run using the note well. Essentially everything you say at the microphone is considered as contribution. Please be aware of that. Anything else you want to say? The blue sheets are running around. Please sign it and then pass it back. If you see others walk into the room, try to get them to them as well. Somewhere in the middle or near the end, we'll move them around the room again, holding them up in the air. Raise your hand if you need to sign it. Well, you're not here at the moment, so how would you know? I just said that. We should have minute takers. Can we ask for some volunteers to help us take minutes on Etherpad? Volunteers for taking minutes? Thank you. And I guess we'll also, so we have to, Jabber, will you be on Jabber? Actually, we should have a Jabber scribe near a microphone. Can someone be Jabber scribe?
Better? Okay, thanks.
And can you see the microphone? Will you be able to see people's badges and read them? Okay, I'll try to speak louder.
I guess he was just wanting to make sure that you're in a position to see the name tags.
So we will be using the Etherpad for taking minutes. There's the agenda, it's been posted. When you need to come to, if you want to speak and come to the microphone, please begin by saying your name and make sure you only use the microphones. Don't try to shout from your chairs. There will be people that are joined in only using Meet Echo and they have to be able to hear you. So first off, I think everyone here has probably seen the email from this morning. We did get the charter approved. This is essentially what we discussed on list about a month ago. There were minor changes to address some ISG concerns. If you take a look at it and if there's any comments that you want to make, bring it to the list. So the status of current chartered working group items. Since Singapore, we did publish 6536 biz. It's now RFC 8341. Congratulations to the authors. We also have a large number of documents that are in progress. Just going through this quickly so we can give some chair status for each of these. First is the Netconf event notifications. The last call issues are still being discussed on the list. We'll have a presentation today. The NMDA Netconf and NMDA RESTconf drafts are both ready for Shepherd write-up. Then there's the notifications messages draft, which will be presented today. There's the RESTconf notification draft, also presented today. 7895, same with the other NMDA drafts, they're ready for Shepherd write-up. Subscribe notifications, the last call issues are still being discussed. The UDP Pubs channel, it's not on the agenda due to there being no discussions since it was last published, but it was updated, I think, this past Monday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, when the submission cutoff was released. If there's no discussions, I was kind of wondering about that update, like the contents of the update. It is a working group document, right? So I would expect that, anything that would have led to an update would have been discussed within the group. But if there was no discussions, then.
Plus, I think there was an update in the draft that was probably not reflected on the mailing list, right?
Right.
Okay.
So I'm thinking. So it just, as a sort of a broad statement, everyone should be aware that these are working group documents. They are owned by the working group. It's really just editors that are performing the updates, but they're doing so at the behest of the working group. So please be sure to run ideas, proposals for updates to the working group mailing list and discuss them there. And then based on those results, update the documents. And be sure to update the documents before the cutoff, so we don't have that issue again. Next is the Yang push, which will be discussed today, and the zero touch draft, which is ready for Shepherd write-up. There's also the more chartered working group items. These are all the key store and related drafts, none of which were updated due to the editor being busy. Help would be greatly appreciated here, the editor told me. If anyone is interested in working on these documents, it would be fantastic if you could help with them. We'd get them done faster. Status of non-chartered items. There are actually a number of individual documents that have been recently presented, and they're all on the agenda for today. And then now for the actual agenda, there'll be 15 minutes for a proposal for refactoring the key store model, 20 minutes, and maybe a little bit more. I think we have some extra time at the end of the schedule, so maybe a little bit more for discussion to discuss the updated comments for the Yang push and related drafts. And then there's a number of all the non-chartered working group item documents, 10 minutes each for those. With lastly, it's not on the slide, but there's 10 minutes of spare time, so maybe we'll use that. Anything else you want to say?
First is yours.
Okay, hi, I'm Kent. Oh, I'm first. So today I'm going to present a proposal for refactoring the key store model. As you just heard, the editor myself has been very busy, so I haven't actually updated the whole Key Store and Friends drafts, but there is this comment that I think Jürgen made quite some time ago about making sure that the modules, actually the names of the modules are reflecting what they are for, and that the scope is as they should be. One of the things he asked for was to remove the private keys, the storage of the private keys themselves from this global container configuration container. And so that update was made in the 04, which was presented in Singapore last time. And but in doing so, the keys are no longer stored there. And so one of the questions becomes, why do we call it a key store module when it's not actually storing keys? And so the whole presentation here is to sort of go over how we might fix that problem. And by doing so by introducing maybe 2 new modules. Okay, so the key store module was primarily modeled after the keychain access macOS utility, albeit without any encryption to protect the private keys. In fact, the module was originally called keychain, but was later changed to deconflict from the keychain module used by the routers. The primary goal of this module was to centralize the configuration of trust anchors. The thinking behind that was because the same set of trust anchors would be needed for authenticating NBI clients. You could have the same set of trust anchors regardless if the NBI clients were Netconf based or RESTconf based, or just have the same. So to configure your trust anchors in one location and then refer to them where you need to. So that was the primary goal. Centralizing the configuration of private keys was added primarily to eliminate needing to have the same yang everywhere. So if we hadn't had the centralizing the private keys, then everywhere you wanted to have a private key, you copy paste the same yang into your yang, to your local yang module. But then it was noted that it's uncommon for implementations to centralize private keys this way, as the Jürgen made. Thus, the top-level keys container was converted to a couple groupings, and all the client-server modules were updated accordingly. But then this raises the question, why is it called a key store? So the proposal is, since the remaining protocol accessible configuration is solely for trust anchors, then renaming the module to trust anchors makes sense. However, the module also defines groupings that are used for the private keys, I talked about on the previous slide, which has nothing to do with trust anchors, and should be moved into another module. Seeing how this module would define a number of crypto-related identities and type defs, this module could also be called, or could be called, IETF crypto types, which would be similar to other types modules. So we have in RFC 6991, IETF Yang type, and I think it's actually plural, and IETF INET types. And then in RFC 6294, there's IETF routing types. So that IETF crypto types might be making sense. It seems like the time has come. We didn't do it before, we didn't have the use case for it, but now we're beginning to define a number of data models which are configuring security parameters. The current contents of the IETF crypto types is as follows. It's essentially 5 different things that are in there. There are identities for hashing algorithms, identities for key algorithms. These would be asymmetric key algorithms. Type defs for ASN.1 structures, groupings for private keys and their associated certificates, and a notification for notifying when a certificate is about to expire. And all this is just a subset of what would be needed to support the key store and friends drafts, or all the client server modules that I've been working on. Some issues with this, though, is that I think cryptology is a big area. It seems like the current IETF crypto types might be just scratching the surface. In the interest of time, it would be good to publish just the subset needed immediately, but we need to know what the end game is now so that we can structure it correctly. And so that kind of leads to the question, should IETF crypto types be refactored further? The 2 groupings for configuring private keys seem like they might be better off somewhere else. I mean, because they are groupings and they're very much specific to how you create private keys, but normally the types modules are just creating identities and type defs. I do believe that in the IETF routing types, they also have groupings, but their groupings are much smaller than the groupings that the groupings that are currently in IETF crypto types also have action statements on them. So they're a little bit more than just a simple grouping. Secondly, the notification could be pulled out, maybe even deleted, because the notification is to alert others when a certificate is about to expire, but where would you put that? You wouldn't necessarily do that just because you're having some trust anchors. So it seems like that might be a module all its own, or just simply delete it and let's not worry about it for now. And then lastly, maybe the ASN.1 type deps could be factored out, something like IETF ASN or ASN1 types, because those are all kind of the same. You take an ASN.1 structure, you say it's dir encoded, you make it, it's a binary, the base type is a binary, and then, so you have a name. But you can imagine there's lots of ASN.1 structures. So you can imagine in the fullness of time, there might be 30 or 40, 50 of these kinds of things. So some options would be keep IETF key store as it is, but maybe rename it. And to what is the question? Switch to the two drafts that are part of this agenda with no more refactoring. Get advice from the security area first to see what the end game looks like. And also for the parts that we do need now, how should they look? So when you start talking about identities for crypto algorithms and hashing algorithms, I'm sure that they have a lot to say about how they should be named and structured. I don't have any other options to share. This is my last slide, so at this point, does anyone have an opinion in terms of which approach we should take?
Hi, I'm Frank Xia from Huawei. Thank you to bring this draft and this discussion here. I personally think that this work is worthwhile to do. And I'm from the security area, and I think I have some knowledge about it. So just to answer your very only question, yeah, I'm willing to contribute to this effort, maybe to continue this work. Go back to your questions here. I think you have just the last page. You have several options. I think my personal feeling is that currently, because from your current draft, I can only see a very simple start for this key store definition. I don't know whether you want to include more crypto operation or configuration information into this mode. So because those deletion we are resulting the last the later how we define from the security aspect how many class we need or how many we organize these modulars. So it's a little bit only to decide to just keep the key store draft or split it into two drafts. So I think the option 3 is more reasonable right now, and we can discuss more based on this first draft and what is the other we need and how to organize them. Then we can decide, how to push the further work. So I think I need to have more discussion with you offline about what is your current idea of what should be included in this key store model in addition to the existing content, right? Because I can see that if you want to currently you only have the certificate information and the private key information, but if you do you need more information such as a symmetrical cryptograph algorithm and the hash function and the random number generator or something? I don't know if it's in your plan. So we can discuss and decide how to process later. So that's my personal idea. Yeah, I want help on this work. Yeah.
First, thank you for offering to help. And secondly, with regards to trying to understand how much more we need to do, we did try to get an early review from sector or from security experts. They're hoping for them to be in the room. Unfortunately, they had conflicts with another meeting, but I think Ignace is going to give this presentation in the SAG working group on Thursday.
Yeah, second, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I'm the author of, I just forget that point. I'm the author of the second, several drafts in second working group, which is also talking about the security baseline configuration and operation status baseline of the security part of the network devices. I think there are some overlapping or there are some similarity goals like yours. So I think we need to work together, or which part should be here and which should be there, and how to work in a consistent way. So yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I think I'm running late or running over, so.
Yeah, if you have people behind you who are also ready to ask? Okay.
So Rob Wilton, Cisco. So my personal choice, I quite like option 2 here. I mean, I think it's okay to change things in a simple way, but don't do too much. I think in terms of the discussion that's happening there, I'm concerned about us spending a long time trying to get to a perfect solution. And I would rather try and get some of this stuff out and published now as models and then revise it. And otherwise we'll never actually get these things published. So I'm more keen to actually try and get this stuff finished quicker and then revise it with extra stuff later.
Hi, Eric Voigt, Cisco. I like option 2 as well, and I support this work going forward. One of the things to consider in looking at your draft, it doesn't refer to the trusted computing group's definitions of trust or anchors, and integrating with what the definitions are to trusted computing group might be a good addition, and it might impact how you actually define the anchor and the trust.
Okay, that's a good comment. Thank you.
Tom Petch, echoing Rob Wilton, get on with it. In your introduction, you mentioned some drafts that not much had happened to lately. In particular, you listed all the client-server ones. And I'm struck by how well those were progressing, and then we refactored them all. And since we refactored them all, they seem to have ground to a halt. So I'm against refactoring. I'm saying just get it out, publish it. We can always have a nice bite at the cherry in a year's 2's time when we've got some experience. Yeah.
Tim Carey, Nokia. I think I concur with the fact that we'd like to move this thing along. But more importantly, when we talk about an option 2 and you switch to these crypto types, what I didn't understand when I looked at it was, particularly for the SSH keys, I didn't see how the referencing would happen with the crypto towards the pinned anchor sites. I wasn't quite sure if I've got an SSH key, how that related to the crypto modules, because I think you kept that in the trust anchor modules, but the actual key realization was in the trust anchor.
Okay, I made a mistake. The trust anchor module does not currently have it's not importing the crypto types module, but it should for instance, the type def or the CMS structure and the X59 structure, which are being used inside the trust anchors module.
So I didn't see how the referencing happened for the SSH keys between the types and the pinned keys at all. I didn't see a reference between the two modules. Did I miss something?
That's what I was just saying. I left it out by accident.
I'm sorry.
I left out the reference from the trust anchor module to the crypto types module.
It's going to go trust anchor to crypto. We just missed the reference.
Correct.
Okay. All right, cool. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And hi, Eric. I think you're.
Well, you just did slides. There's not that many of them. Or do you want me to press? You want me to go?
Just no. Or it's too slow. Next thing.
It's not coming up at all.
Okay, so we're having a little bit of technical difficulty with bringing this presentation. Oh,
Got it.
No.
Different
overall,
presentation.
Different presentation. Yeah,
I think we're there.
Yeah, okay, he has it.
Yep, yep. Thank you very much. I am Eric Voigt, on behalf of myself, Alex Clem, who's right here, and many other people who've been involved over the last few years on the subscription drafts. We've been trying to progress 3 of the drafts towards last call. You've seen a lot of emails on the list with a lot of great comments, and I want to thank quite a few people in the room. I'm going to throw a few names out. I'm going to miss a lot of them. People like Kent and Ballas and Martin and Andy as part of the Yang doctors and Keaton. And again, I'm going to miss a lot of people, but we've got a lot of great comments on the last call. At this point, I don't think there's anything that seems insurmountable. We're going to be talking about where these first 3 drafts are in last call, and we're going to hit a couple of the issues that we see on the list. We might even be able to resolve a few of them pre-validation on the list. But again, I'm speaking on behalf of myself, Alex, and the others trying to get these through last call. So first thing we're going to do is address the first 3 drafts with event streams, Yang data stores, and then the Netconf transport. Now on the Netconf subscribe notifications working group last call, we've done a number of changes, such as requests to make it work like 5277 with the filtering of event records within streams based on permissions. And that actually has some interesting implications for some people over in the core working group who have a different construct that they're looking at, but we're going to go ahead and follow the 5277. We've had security considerations update based on trying to match the templates put together by NetMod. Obviously, some stuff like tree diagrams referenced, reference numbers used for the state machine figures, breaking out configuration, replay into its own sections. There's been a lot of things which have been proposed on the list. None of these are actually going to be considered closed until we have a chance for people who made the comments or want to comment on the proposals have a chance to get through those as part of last call. There's still some unresolved issues. We have some slides coming up that go over several of these that came up from people in the room. And of course, there's more things that could evolve out of existing discussions. For example, the Yang doctor comments are almost complete. There are, again, not huge items coming out of there, but they could drive some more items as well. In terms of review question 1, and this is one that Martin identified, and I think it's a good point. The question was, do we want to use integer, do we want to use a string object, as an index for receiver instead of using address plus port? The current draft has address and port, but that makes it difficult to go ahead and augment or add new things, such as leaf refs to other drafts where we might want to identify other receivers. So I don't think that anybody right now is going to say they want to continue with address port. The real question open to the group is, do we want to have the name as a string under receiver? Probably yes. And do we want to have address and port as an option to be populated into the receiver, or do we want to just allow people with their own augmentations to define what receivers are? So in talking about this with some people offline and online, the proposal is a preference for option 2, which would use name as a string, but we're certainly open to whatever gets the working group's preference. We're just trying to record what the working group wants to do here. Martin?
Yeah, Martin Björklund. So should we discuss them as you go, I guess?
What's that?
You want to discuss the issues now?
We can. I mean, this is trying to give an overview, but go into the details if you want to try to get to some early consensus.
Right. So I would prefer option 3. The reason is that Netconf, both Netconf and RESTconf call home has another way of doing this. That is the Netconf and RESTconf client and server documents that Kent is working on. So if we also had address and port down in the receiver list, it would be redundant at the best. Or otherwise, what would it actually mean? How would you use the address and port in the receiver?
The question is...
You always need something more, right? Like authentication information and stuff like that.
It certainly can be a leaf ref to other receivers as defined in those other working groups. I think that makes sense. I do know some people who do not want to reference the external groups and just want to go ahead and configure address and ports. So I see it as an and rather than an or, that people can address with address and port, other people can have leaf refs, and that there's no reason why receivers cannot have multiple things. And what I'm hoping, and again, it's not a strong preference, is that we allow augmentations so that receivers can be defined in many ways, and you just take the set of them in the list of receivers.
Right. I mean, option 3 isn't complete on its own. Obviously, it's just a name, so it kind of relies on augmentations in the future. And
yes,
if we actually had those other documents published, I would suggest that we had references here to those other documents. But we
yes.
don't have that, so that's why the option 3 is just fairly open. But I still don't understand how the address and port would actually be used.
Yes, but the question is, you can still augment option 2 to also allow leaf refs there. So I think
Yeah,
that,
but then you would have both, right? So
Yes.
so you could specify a name and possibly netconf call home information and a reference to that, and also address and port. And what does that mean? I think even address and port you can augment for those transports that just need address and port, whatever that would be. That's no transports that we have here, right?
again, I think
So,
it
yeah,
makes sense to have
that's
address and
my
port. We
opinion.
can close either way. I'm happy with whatever the working group says. It seems easier, but again, if people just want to have one or one of both, yeah, whatever the working group thinks. Thoughts? Any others? All right. So again, we'll resolve it, but again, there's just it's just a preference.
This is Alex Clem. So what is I'm getting really, what is the process for us to get closure on this? So I feel similarly, but preference from my side is option 2. I think actually having address and port, I think many users will need it. I don't see an issue with overspecifying specifically with that, but that being said, if option 3 is the preferred one, that's fine, but we shouldn't, but we need to get to closure.
All right. So I think just start a thread on the list and see how many people like one or the other, or other questions.
Well, this has already been discussed in one thread, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, ideally, we take each of these threads and run them individually to ground. So
Exactly.
if you can keep the comments within the existing thread. And I know that a lot of people did a reply all on my original, last call thread, but if we could spin them out into each of their own threads and then drive them each to ground, that'd be great.
I will be happy to spin this out into its own thread. Okay, second issue is the question of subscription state notification extension. Currently, there is a subscription state notification which makes sure that the state notifications do not get picked up by things like the Netconf stream. And subscription state notifications really only go to the impacted receivers. Now, with that extension, you go ahead and allow the notifications to be marked so they get extracted. The option, if you don't have that state notification, is to actually put text in or some mechanism to identify each notification as being excluded from the Netconf stream. I think the current solution makes the most sense. I don't know if there's anybody who wants to propose that we get rid of the extension. I'm just trying to open it up. Arguments? Right. So we'll continue there. Third question is DSCP. The DSCP, which is identifying the transport coding, which should be going across the transport. Should it be an optional feature on its own, or should it be mainline? Right now, the current is that all the QoS features are in their own optional feature. The question is, should DSCP be its own individual feature, or is it so simple that we just move it back into the mainline as an optional feature? I have no preference onto how this is done. I don't know if anybody has a strong preference. I think it makes the most sense to either option 1 or 3 just for reducing the number of features. But again, I'm just opening to the working group if they have any strong opinions now. All right, we can take it on the list. Again, we'll salute whatever people want. Last one, for at least, back to the previous one.
Sorry, Jason Stern. Just a more general question about the dependency functionality.
Yes,
Am I right to, if I understand that it really only kicks in if you have something queued on the output of the publisher?
correct.
And then you would like kind of artificially delay sending an update while you're waiting for something else?
Correct.
And how do you know that you have to wait? How do you know something might be pending? It's only if something actually is pending that,
Yes. It's a dequeuing thing. It actually matches directly to how HTTP2 dequeues multiple streams, and that if there's a dependency one stream to the other, it will go ahead and send that other stuff first. This is really for people who have very large set of objects which are being sent, but you also have a very short events which have priority. The real goal is just to be able to provide an indication for the transport layer, should it be capable of it, of preempting one flow in order to insert a more important subscription flow within.
okay, so you see it almost as like a strict priority mechanism that if you have a whole bunch of things queued, you want to let some
That's absolutely
certain
what it is.
events go first.
Yes.
Okay.
And the text has been tweaked to pull away a normative reference to the HTTP2 QoS, and now the latest version based on the comments is a better text description. But again, we can nail that down. Okay, last one for Yang push is what is the right names to use within the Yang data containers? Right now what we have is established subscription Yang data error stream. Proposal was there that we should actually rename it to something like stream established subscription error info. Again, we'll salute either way. The question is, do you want to have -info at the end or not? It doesn't matter to me. I think some people have stated a preference for option 2. If there's no disagreement, we can just rename it to option 2. There's no reason why we can't do that. Okay, so that's it. That'll resolve quickly. Now, in Yang, another question?
Sorry, Jason Stern, it was a question back on one of your earlier slides. You're talking about some changes to authorization. So kind of two questions around that. One is what direction are you moving as far as granularity of dealing with authorization? Because in the current draft, you mentioned that you kind of don't dig it within an event and filter kind of subparts of a notification out.
Yes, with events, basically you can either do a pass-fail test, and the text has been improved, but you do a pass-fail test on whether that event goes on that stream goes to that receiver.
So if the event contains multiple leafs from around the data model, and that receiver is not allowed to access, leaf 3 out of 5, the idea is that you would filter out the entire
Exactly.
Update. Okay, should probably clarify that.
There is some clarifying text, and the text that makes it a very different mechanism than for Yang push. One of the reasons to differentiate from Yang push, basically you either get the event or you don't, versus the Yang push where you do a
filtering at a granular level.
Yes.
Okay. And then the second part of my question is there's been some discussion and mentions about if authorization rules change during the life of a subscription, you're supposed to kind of go in and take those into effect immediately. And it talks about in the draft, for example, that when the authorization rules change, you may have to notify the subscription subsystem with that update. So it can take the new rules into effect. But I'm kind of wondering how that would work if you are using some sort of remote authorization like TACAX or Radius or something for this type of thing, because you're not going to get notified that rules have changed.
Correct. You have to understand who is using what rules, and there are several ways you can approach this. And talking to Andy Bierman in the beginning, certainly you're allowed to go ahead and install new rules if you have them. If you don't have the ability to do that, you can kill a subscription and force it to restart so that the rules load the first time. Both are acceptable mechanisms for accomplishing this.
I'm not sure if that addresses my question. It's more in the middle of a subscription, in the middle of the life of a subscription, if your rules are up on a remote server. I know there's no standard right now for NACM, rules being provided by TACAX or Radius, but presumably we're probably moving in that direction at some point, or operators will want to have centralized management of their authorization rules, and it'll apply to subscriptions. So how is the publisher's not going to know about a change to those rules halfway through a subscription?
Correct. There's nothing new in this document which gets into remote acquisition of the rules. It assumes that the rules are known by the publisher and it will react to them. So the remote integration is out of scope.
It assumes that the publisher can learn about a change to the rules.
Yes.
Because it says in here that you're supposed to take into account any changes of rules.
Yes.
So I don't see how that's ever going to work with remote rules.
We can start a thread offline, but
Okay.
the goal is there has to be a remote rule thing, whether it's subscriptions or non-subscriptions. So I think the mechanism for remote rule management should be common across whatever set of things we have beyond subscriptions.
Okay, so you're leaving it outside the scope of this, but you think there's a general problem where we have to
there's a general
somehow
problem.
notify publishers about changes to authorization rules if they're remote?
Yeah, and not just a publisher, any Netconf or RESTconf data store.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so I think we addressed 4. Going to working group last call. I didn't mention Rob Wilton before, but he also had some good comments. We've made from version 15 to version 16 so far, unchanged damping period. There's other minor items being worked. And Alex is in the process of spearheading the reply comments on that. Also, one thing that's highlighting is the on-change capability. Marking has been deferred to a future draft. Ballas is talking later in this session about alternatives for this needed capability. Beyond that, going to Netconf event notifications. Working to the last call, I think the numbering is off. It's actually 9 to 10. And we have tweaks to non-normative examples. We have a script uploaded to validate the examples in Git. Biggest unresolved issue is that there's a question of what's in the abstract and info. Multiple proposals are out there. What's there? We'll salute whatever people think is the appropriate way to include it. It's fine with us, however that gets broken out. Last things, Netconf, RESTconf notif, there's been minor tweaks and many updates are needed. We're waiting to focus on this after the complete last call. People, of course, are welcome to make any comments at any time, but I think that once these first set of drafts complete, last call, we can start to get into RESTconf and HTTP2 transport as well.
So I'd like to ask a question about that. On the previous slide, when you were talking about subscribe notifications, no, you don't actually go to the previous slide, but you were saying that the DSCP option was effectively identical to HTTP2 mechanisms, or very similar, right? It was modeled after, kind of?
Actually, not the DSCP, the waiting and the dependency.
Okay. But my thinking is that because of that, maybe it would make sense for us to look at this RESTconf notif draft. We don't necessarily have to take it to last call, but at least understand it, have, for instance, a 2-week review of it or something like that before we complete the last call of these existing drafts. Or does it make sense? And could I just worry that we might be missing out? How sure are you that this is implementable is the question.
Oh, I'm sure that the waiting and the dependency are implementable because it's a direct mapping to what's in HTTP2. So I'm not at all worried that is going to be an issue. We have early code that does it, and it's just a straight mapping into existing constructs.
Okay. And then the second question would be, how long do you think it will take to complete this work? When might it be ready for last call?
Yeah, the hardest part, and it's been a hard part for a couple of years now, is that we've been trying to enable the seamless transport of gRPC across this, and we've done some tweaks a couple of years ago to allow gRPC to be transported over this draft, for example, moving from a get to a post model. And we've never really gotten the validation from others that we can make sure it's seamless with gRPC. So our blocker really has been, if we want to make sure gRPC gRPC gets transported seamlessly, we don't have anybody who's willing to validate that this is occurring. And that's been a blocker for a couple of years now. So that's the problem. It's not, we got slowed down because we couldn't validate that firm requirement.
Okay.
Okay, Netconf notification messages. There's been an update, and two big changes is there's a reduction of two header message formats to one. We could always break back to a two later, but working with one seems to make sense until we find that people want to split back to two. So that's the biggest part. The other part is that we've been having discussions with people over in Core and Comey and with signatures, and there was a desire to go ahead and make signatures a footer rather than be something in the header. The reason is that when you sign something, you want to explicitly sign the header and the body as defined in the footer. So people have asked to go ahead and move the signatures as a separate footer in order to make it explicit what is being signed. We expect additional updates on this based on stuff going on in Comey and CBOR, but this is probably the biggest change. Other upcoming dialogues beyond that is that there has to be something on the capability of receivers. People like Mahesh have seen this with some of his work and his drafts, is that we're starting to get to have to know what is the capability of the receiver when we're trying to push stuff to it. So that's one other thing I expect to be in the dialogues in the coming weeks and so.
Okay, sorry, a couple comments as well. So this addition of the footer, I mean, it's a good idea, but I think this is an example of something that's been added without necessarily going to the working group, a proposal that was brought to the list. I looked for it on the mailing list, I couldn't find it.
All right.
So just be cautious going forward.
All right, that's a good comment. I thought Hank had put it out there on the list. If he hasn't, then I'll work with him to do that. He's going to be writing the next draft, but I certainly don't want to do anything that's not on the list, and Hank is about to do this update.
Okay, and my second comment is more as a contributor. I think you need to change your import from being the RESTconf Yang data to Yang data extension, the new draft that was just adopted by the NetMod working group.
Happy to do that. All right, Rob.
So just one quick question. Have you looked at the size of the data for these sort of telemetry notifications relative to, say, what gRPC would generate? So I know that Rob's going to speak later, I think, but he was talking to the routing working group how they've tried to optimize the size of the messages to be as small as possible to get the most data off. So I was just wondering if there's any comparisons. I just see there's a lot of fields up there. I just wonder, is that going to be a lot of overhead in terms of the size of messages?
Absolutely. The question is, what is the overhead this implies? Most of the objects in here are optional. And again, the people who have been pushing this, again, are on the CBOR side of things. So the question of efficiency is going to be one that is mostly relevant based on what Hank and CBOR and Comey people have been looking at. I am believing that the proper way to at least spec it is to get the fields identified, and later we can go ahead and say, do we need a single bundled message, and look at efficiency that way and identify the standard headers that are there. So there has been some work a while ago trying to get down to the standard fields that are identified before doing a detailed analysis. And that detailed analysis would probably be for specific transports rather than general.
Yeah, I think it's just be interesting to see what that size difference is.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Agreed.
So Rob Shakir, Google, I think it's fundamental to have to do that analysis that Rob's.
Rob, can you speak up, please?
Oh, sorry. Maybe I'm not tall enough for this microphone. I think it's fundamental to do that analysis. What we've found with designing alternate solutions to this is that we've refactored a few times due to getting that efficiency. Actually, the deployability of it depends on having efficient encoding. And even it's also probably not really technically correct to say what gRPC as a general thing encoding is, because that you can design it in different ways. So we've gone around analysis of self-describing formats. We've done path value with compression, and kind of got to a few different approaches that give you better scalability. So I can probably share some of that analysis if it's of interest.
Just one last comment. The version 3 really was not intended to be a separate version 3. was supposed to go into HINC. So shortly we should be having a lot of the discussion. So apologize for uploading it before the discussions are completed.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Igor?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Igor Briskin. I'm from Hawaii. And this is basically effort of Young Push design team. One of the things that we were discussing on our bi-weekly meetings. And there are my co-authors on the screen, right? And we basically also discussed this idea with other folks like Joel Halpern and Andy Bierman and Rob Wilson. Basically, many people were involved. So I just want to warn you that this might sound a little bit strange. Okay, so we present it for the first time. Please be open-minded. Okay, so basically the whole thing, what is all about? Netconf proved to be a very successful and useful tool for use cases when a client can control network in interactive way. Basically, the client asks for certain configurations, then basically pick up certain data states, analyzes data states, calls some RPCs, whatever, then asks for more reconfiguration, so forth, right? So, but the client cannot micromanage network, every single behavior, right? So there are always things that network has to perform while client is not looking. So what we are trying to do is there any way to control the behavior of the network when it works autonomously, but still provide a way for a client to say something about how this behavior has to be done. Okay, so and that's the objective basically is to control what we call closed loop automation by configuring standard ECAs, event condition actions, and pushing them to the server, hook them to well-defined and specified events, and basically pick all this requests for reconfiguration, calling RPC, getting data into these little scripts, hook them to the events, and condition their execution based on current or historical data states. Okay? And basically what we are not trying to do is to, invent a new scripting language or scripting environment. Our goal is just to standardize a simple way to configure these event condition action statements and let server whatever he can do, proprietary, not so proprietary, in order to trigger this their execution at proper time. So for example, if the server supports a Python or Tickly or Juno script or whatever scripting environment, it is possible that the server will take the configured ECA and generate out of this ECA these little scripts and trigger them at proper times. But basically, this is how this is done. It's outside of what we're trying to suggest. Okay, so the good question is, do we actually need such ECAs at all? And what we think is that there are use cases where it is actually quite useful to do. Like, for example, there could be events in the network, the responses to which could be very well understood before these events happen. And the client may simply say, you know what, in case you see this event, please check states A, B, C, D, and all of this, if this checked, please do those reconfigurations for me.
let me know if something happens, but otherwise don't bother me. So this would be one thing, right? The other interesting use case is that sometimes there are simply no time to waste on network client communications, right? Like my favorite analogy is that, say, if a battleship is torpedoed, the crew is not expected just to report this little telemetry to the central control and wait for instructions. When the instructions will come, the ship goes down, right? So the same logic may apply to the network. Say, whether the connectivity is restored within, say, 40 milliseconds or within, say, 30 milliseconds may mean 10 millisecond difference. And for a client like, say, high frequency trader, it literally may mean like millions of dollars, right? So the other thing is that what we think that the controller could be more scalable and take care of much more details and things on the network if the controller can delegate certain decisions to subordinates, right? So for example, say I'm human, right? And if I have to control my blinking and breathing and digestion, I would not be able to give this presentation and listen to your comments. Right, so it's just like whether you want to have a CEO and which controls every single member of staff, or you have CEO and it has his lieutenants and whom it can delegate certain logic to and certain decisions to make while taking care of like a high level decision. Now, and finally, there are many interesting applications that can simply form like a free programmable logic and push it to the server and have it executed to see what all kinds of what ifs. For example, within the ECA, you can configure some little script basically saying, if these links go down, what happens, right? If any link on the network goes down, what happens? Which services will be protected, which will be recovered, which will be not protected, or maybe it's two failures simultaneously. So things like that could be done if the client has a way of, form some programmable logic, push it to the server, and server just supporting the model and making it possible to interpret this logic, and knowing nothing else could actually readily provide such tools. Okay, so basically ECAs have like several components. One important component, what we call policy variable, and it's maybe not a good name, but this is something that we want to call the ECA state. ECA state is some result of condition evaluation or action execution or whatever that you can remember and use in condition immediately within the same ECA or maybe between ECAs, right? So for example, if you want to condition a certain action like reconfiguration based on not a current data state, but say median data state over a certain period of time, or the rate of change or velocity, the change happening, right? Then the PV would be the place where you keep evaluating and keep modifying this value, and then you can use in the condition expression. And policy variables we defined, they could be just like C variables. They could be global or local, and local could be dynamic or static. So the local PVs, they're only scoped to a particular ECA, and they are not accessible from other to a particular ECA, and they cannot be accessible from outside of this ECA. And the global PVs are those states that could be shared between ECA. So one ECA may, for example, compute and update this state, and others can use in condition expressions to make decisions.
Igor, can you speed up a little bit?
Sure.
Rick Taylor, Airbus. A lot of this, I really support this work. Some work's going on in the DTN working group, which has been brought in by some of the space guys, because although they're not using Netconf and NetMod for this, they're already doing this with existing spacecraft. You can imagine you launch something out of Pluto, you need it to react to events and manage it itself, because your round trip delay is quite long. So there's a whole body of work that is already at the IETF on this. I'd really like to get together with you, because we're doing it without that Netconf richness. And I've mentioned it to Kent and various other people, Rob, for example. We'd really like to take the work we're doing on ECAs and make it fit well with the Netconf and the Yang models. So I think there's some real crossover. It is a very complex environment. There's lots of rabbit holes to shoot down. But I think if we can scope the use cases down to something manageable, I think there is something worth doing here. So if you want to grab me afterwards, I can point you at all the work we've got already and try and get some alignment.
Sure. I would like to finish that, because what we're trying to do is to actually to scope to not so much to Netconf, but to Yang, and all the conditions and actions that we allow in the ECAs, they're strictly exactly the same that the client has an access to if the client would do it interactively. Okay, there's no, it's just like your usual get data, edit config, call RPC, make a subscription, remove subscription, send notifications, stuff like that, and nothing more than that. So it's just basically taking whatever client can do interactively and just bind them in these little scripts. So that's why I hate the policy word, because as soon as it is pronounced, it seems like to be a curse on IETF. Everything to do with policies, it inevitably fails so far. That's why it's maybe a proper call. It's like ECS state, but that's another story, right? So again, ECA has like three components except for PVs. It's event, condition, and actions. Event could be anything that basically it's either explicitly defined by one of the models that Sora supports, right? Or it could be subscription, say Yang push subscription or smart filter subscription. Basically, what we're interested in is that just the trigger, the smart trigger, and basically that's why we think it's a generalization of Yang push, that this trigger does not trigger notification like in case of Yang push or smart filter. Instead, it does something else. Like for example, network reconfiguration. But otherwise, it's basically the same as the trigger or explicitly defined event. Now, condition is it's a logical expression.
Igor, you have just 1 minute.
Oh, okay.
Please.
So condition is a logical expression which is either evaluated to true or false, and it could be either expressed as an XPath expression on assumption that Sora supports XPath expression, or you can build up from simple comparisons and hierarchy B to a logical expression. And basically, one last thing. The actions are limited, so it's not anything you can do. It's only limited to your traditional Netconf style edit config, get data, call RPC things. But for example, unlike smart filters, in the notification you can set not just a current data state, but for example, historical data state or any derivative of that. So because we have this luxury of PVs to provide, right? And you can obviously you can share conditions and actions between ECAs, and you can actually chain ECAs one after another and call one ECAs from the other. That's all.
Yeah. Thanks.
Question?
Tim Carey, Nokia, just a couple of comments. One is, has Jürgen seen what you're doing with respect to that? Has he weighed in at all? Do you know? Jürgen Schroeder?
He's online, but
So the reason why I asked that was because in LMAP, they created a Yang model already that did similar types of things. And so I'm just wondering if there's a duplication here that can be reused. The other question I would have is, I know that in the NetMod group, there's the finite state machine model, and I'm questioning whether this is a duplication of what they're doing there. I'm not saying I agree with Rick that, this is important work. I'm just wondering if it either hasn't already been done or isn't already being done somewhere else in the NetMod on one of those two things.
Right. So I didn't talk to Jürgen yet, but I did talk a lot to Andy Bierman. And basically his opinion, that's exactly how he sees policies based on Netconf Yang. Okay, so, and in his opinion, this is like a simple way to actually push policies, whether we call it ECAs or not. And it's just taking all the riches of the Netconf or Yang modeling that already is in place and just use them in a programmatic way.
Right. I guess my statement or my comment is that before you get too far along there, I'd go look and see what the LMAP guys did, and also what
which guys? Sorry,
the LMAP, they've already done it as part of an RFC. It's the information model that includes same type of approach to do it, and it's been tied into the IPPM work for performance monitoring and diagnostics and stuff like that you need to do these actions.
All right.
And it's got the workflow engine in there as well as the work that's happening in a NetMod for the finite state machine.
And I was going to mention the same thing, that you really need to take a look at what's going on in NetMod, working with the finite state machine draft that's being presented in the very next session. So you may want to go to this. This work may go there. I'm not sure if it fits the charter in this working group.
Just a quick, Rick Taylor, quick point to the chairs. I think that the fact that this work is sort of cropping up in other working groups who sort of have a need for it, I think either Netconf or NetMod, or probably NetMod, I think need to own this to stop us all inventing it in our own working groups, again, slightly differently. Because you look at Netconf and you say, oh, well, hold on, I can automate some of this. And then we're here again. So I think somebody needs to grasp this and own this properly. So,
okay. Sure.
All right, thank you.
All right. I will be talking about binary encoding. Really, although the title says binary encoding, the idea is that we want to introduce the concept of being able to negotiate an alternate form of encoding. So one of the proposed parameters is to say that the URI would allow you to specify a comma-separated list of encodings. So one of the suggestions coming mainly from Martin was, and this is something Andy had also proposed, is instead of having a separate activate that both the client and the server advertise their list of encodings. The client does it in its preferred order, where the server does it in a random order. And the client just picks whatever the next encoding is that it likes, and it sends it in that format. And we're willing to adopt that and drop the idea of activate. So what is being encoded? So there was a bit of a discussion around whether it makes sense to do encoding above the messaging layer or including the messaging layer. So this is relating to figure 1 in RFC 6241. There are, of course, pros and cons of each. If we go everything above the messaging layer, which means keeping the RPC in the XML format, you don't quite get all the benefit of encoding, say, in a binary format, because you have to do base 64 encoding. The disadvantage is that now the messaging layer has to be defined for every encoding mechanism. So this is something we can take it to the thread, but if there are any comments on what would be the preferred method. Next, the suggestions on encoding formats. There are several that people have suggested. I've just listed a few of them. The first question is, I think that Robert Wilton asked, is how to track revisions of an encoding format. I think the answer coming from Martin was, well, it'll be just another string specifying the version number. The second question related to, do we need an identity definition for each one of these encoding formats? I think, again, Martin responded and said that we don't necessarily need it. If it's registered in IANA, it's an encoding format. Next, RESTConf support for encoding. We currently list here the capability, and maybe it's my impression, but I could get it wrong, is that the content header in RESTConf would allow you to specify the encoding that is being used. Now, if there are other implications as a result of it that we need to be aware of, I would love to know. If we need to know, or if there's anything else that from an encoding we need to specify in the draft itself. Question on notifications, support for it. Certainly talking to Eric about what the impact of the change in encoding format is. The idea is that the time we change it for in the Netconf session would also impact the publisher. And the idea is that within the subscribe notification, the publisher specifies the encoding that they're going to use, right? Did I get that right, Eric? Okay.
As a contributor, I think that depends if it's a dynamic description versus a configured description. With a dynamic description, you pass the encoding as a parameter. With a configured description, it's both encoding and protocol.
The bigger question when we were talking, we'll get back to that, was it's not just for subscribe notifications, it also impacts 5277 as well, because it's not used to being able to handle changes to notifications underway. So the breadth of what's impacted includes dynamic if there is a change after the subscription has started.
Right. So I think on the 5277, maybe the agreement is that we won't be able to support 5277. Correct. All right. From next steps perspective, it's to update the draft reflecting some of the comments that we have already received on the mailing list, and then ask for adoption once we have updated the draft.
Questions?
I have a comment on the Netconf drafts about the encoding.
Can you speak up?
I'll probably try to. Okay, so can you go to the next slide, maybe? Yeah. So if you just encode the stuff within the RPC, so first of all, if it's a binary encoding, you would have to somehow base encode it, base64 encode it or something.
That's correct.
Right? So then you would have the open RPC tag and then a blob of base64 data and then end the tag. So that doesn't match the XML schema defined in 70-41. So you would have to have a weird XML, or your XML parser would have to be prepared for getting data that doesn't match the schema and decode it and then do something about it.
Okay.
Right? So I think that the only way that would work would be to actually put the entire session in, binary encoding and do that, including the message layer.
Okay.
And that goes with, you have the same issue with notifications and so on. If you just change the encoding of the notification body, within XML or JSON, it's going to be tricky. I don't know how that would work.
Okay. So. Right. I guess what was influencing us was the fact that CBOR, for example, doesn't necessarily talk about the messaging layer. So we'll have to, in addition, now define the messaging layer for, say, CBOR as an encoding format.
Rick Taylor, this might be a naive question, but If you're changing the coding, including the message layer, and I take your point about if you're base64 encoding binary within your XML fragment, then you haven't got something that validates until you post-process the internals and then run it again. It's no longer Netconf, it's another Yang supporting configuration protocol like RESTconf or CBORconf or whatever. So why have different encodings for Netconf? Why not just say we'll do a binary conf?
Probably has to do with the adoption of Netconf protocol itself and the need for a more compressed form to transmit the data.
Okay.
I think you said it, but I mean, rather than switching the encoding, switching the protocol, right?
Yeah, I was actually just going to respond to that. Jason Stern here, because I think the intention there is that you're still encoding the RPCs and all the operations layer of Netconf. So still Netconf is just in a different binary encoding.
Yeah. Sorry, just responding, Rick, again. The RESTconf is pretty much a worked example of that. It does pretty much everything Netconf does. It's just got a different name and a different encoding, but it's still the same old RPCs and it's the same shape protocol. You know, we do the same things. Perhaps it's just semantics, but I don't see the point of just encoding the content and leaving the messaging in the original encoding. But I'm all in favor of keep the shape because we all know how this works. Let's not invent something wildly different. But I think we're halving the problem in the wrong place.
Okay.
Rob Shakir. It would be interesting to see for the binary encoded approach. However, and having to do some unmarshalling of base64 or whatever it ends up being, what the performance of the underlying transport is at the same time, right? So this is kind of, we'll make the message payload more efficient, but if we're in single stream SSH land, like I'm pretty sure that the throughput limit is not you're going to run into the throughput limit of the transport at any large data set anyway. So at that point, then debating about exactly how we encode this thing is sort of a moot point. We should maybe just design a protocol that works.
Okay, so a couple comments. First, as a contributor, I think that the desire for wanting to binary encode the data is primarily for high throughput or large messages, mostly telemetry, analytic type data, which makes me think about the
make any change. Clarify the relationship with the young push mechanism draft. Actually, in young push draft, they define the push change update notification. This is actually application specific notification. So we compare this application specific notification with the notification we define in our draft. Actually, we can see the three main differences. The first is for push change update, they focus on the per subscription basis. That means they only can be used to send the per subscription data store contents invoked by the client. And for the notification we define in our draft, actually they can report the data change event associated with multiple subscription of the receivers. The second change is the push change update actually is application specific, but the Netconf data change actually is general purpose notification. So no need to tie to any subscription ID. The last change actually is for push change update, they focus on push entire or portion of the data store contents. But for the notification we define in this draft, actually, they can report the data store metadata like who make the data store change or identify specific location or phase of the configuration changes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
Voigt, just one other thing worth adding in the differences is that the push change update is a Yang patch operation as well. So it defines a delta to the data store rather than the objects.
Yeah, sure.
I'll let you.
Okay, I think for next step, I just want to get a feel the sense of this idea from the room, and we can decide whether they fit into this working group, whether we need to standardize this kind of mechanism. Yeah, that's all. Comments?
So Tim Carey-Nokia, well, I guess you got one thing for sure that we kind of missed when we did the NMDA. We missed the data stores in 60. So my question is that why wouldn't this just be a biz to that RFC instead of a new RFC, since that's the approach that we're taking with other pieces as we're correcting for NMDA? We just biz that? I'm asking.
It's a good question. I don't think we need to answer that right now, though. In terms of like bringing this into the working group, we first need to discuss it on the list. Some, I mean, this draft just got posted near the end of February, and there's been no discussion on it yet. So I know we're presenting it here, but we need to take it to the list and discuss it more there. But if we were to move forward with it, then that could be something that we discuss.
Right. Thanks.
It's an option.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So I think I'm looking at this, I'm just wondering whether actually the Yang push is a better generalized mechanism to doing this. So I question whether this is required, I think, is my thought.
So Robert, it is a notification, and notifications are pushed through Yang push.
Okay, to clarify, I think that I wonder whether you want a single notification to say that the configuration has changed in the operational state data store, or whether it's better just to have a generalized subscription on that data store, the configuration nodes, and then you get told whenever any config change happens, you get given the diff, the patch anyway. So this feels like this was before you had things like Yang push. This is somebody hard coding a particular notification. I feel that subscriptions and Yang push is like a generalized mechanism that you can just choose to subscribe to whatever you want to. And should this be just one of those things? Does it need to be special cased?
So to answer Rob's question a little bit is that I see this as two problems, right? One is broken RFC, right? Because you're missing the data stores that are explicit in it. So fix the RFC. The second is that you got a new notification, right? And the question is that new notification, do you want to tie that to a push mechanism, or do you want it to use the generalized notification mechanism that would be in, 5277 or something like that. And I think that can go on the list, but fix the RFC and then ask if you need to have a new notification mechanism that would be part of a stream. And I think, then that could be its own draft, or maybe even part of a biz, but, certainly fix the RFC.
Balázs Erickson. I see value in this, that you are trying to transfer the who changed it, and also, let's say, some other metadata, for example, origin could be changed. These are not present in Yang push. On the other hand, you are missing the subscription, you are missing the filters, you are missing stored configurations, you are missing a lot of things. And if you start pushing all this data with additional metadata, that will be a lot. And I don't see it worth duplicating really the functionality.
I think the notification defined here actually is more focused on the monitoring, but for the notification defined in the Yang push is actually push the data store contents. Actually, yet they did include many parameters, but I think here we try to generate this kind of notification. So they serve different purposes actually, as I mentioned.
Okay, so thank you, Chin. If you could please take some of these questions to let's start threads on them, and then we'll close them there.
Great, thank you.
And now Rob, thank you.
So I'm going to talk about GNMI, which is an alternative to Netconf. I was asked to come and present here after submitting some wider, after we submitted this draft and after talking in RTGWG. The motivation for talking here is want to kind of inform the IETF about the open source development that we're doing and the implementations of it, particularly as this alternative. Feed some of our development and deployment experience back. We have this in production at some scale, so we've kind of been through a bunch of iteration of making it work. It kind of feeds back to some of the binary encoding discussions and comments I was making. And invite anyone who's interested to contribute. It's an open source project in terms of specification and code, and we're not asking for adoption here, so I'm sure it would be controversial if we were, so we're maintaining this outside of the IETF, and we'd like to keep it that way right now. So GNMI is a protocol that's used for both configuration manipulation and state retrieval from a device. All the data that's handled in it must be described using a path that consists of a name and a map of strings for attributes. There's no requirement for that to be Yang modeled. It just has to conform to a tree that has those attributes. And we wanted to do that to make sure that there was some flexibility in the modeling language that could be used for payloads. It's built on top of gRPC, which is a framework that Google open source, and it's managed in the CNCF. It's an RPC framework that uses HTTP2 as the transport, so it's got efficient streaming involved in it. There's the RPCs that you can describe in gRPC are either unary, so request response, or server streaming, client streaming, or bidirectional streaming. So where both sides can send a multitude of messages. The multiplexing of those RPCs is over a single HTTP channel, and the kind of implementation looks after a lot of the channel management for you. And so as the producer of data, you send it onto multiple channels, and the HTTP2 transport underlying multiplexing and management is looked after. Service definitions in gRPC are written in protobuf, so the GNMI specification is, and the encoding that's used on the wire is proto. Inside of that in GNMI, then we have a bit like the encoding enum that we were kind of talking about earlier, the same thing, and can encode into binary values, which are protobuf binary serialization, or JSON or ASCII text, etc. So GNMI has 4 RPCs. It's relatively simple. It's got a set RPC which does the manipulation of the writable state of the target. So this has a simplified transaction model on top of the the way that the one in Netconf works. So we assume that we require that the client pre-stages the set of changes that are going to be made in a single transaction, and then sends that set message as part of the unary set RPC to the device. The device then applies the entire set of changes that are within that message, or rolls them back. We found that this gives us a bunch of simplification on the client side. We don't have to keep track of multiple candidates that are happening, or long-lived candidates. And in our change workflow and in the change workflows of those that we've worked with on this project, it's as soon as a machine is making this configuration change, it doesn't really get bored and walk off in the middle of changes, so it can be trusted to have compiled the set of changes that it wants into a single transaction. The subscribe RPC is a streaming RPC from the target, which is what we call the network element, the device, to send state to the client. We have immutable subscriptions, so they're created with a particular mode and a particular set of paths. They can't be changed during flight. There's 3 different modes of those subscriptions. So we have a stream, which is a long-lived push from the device. So the client opens a connection, subscribes to a set of paths, and for these things, then the target continues to update those paths according to either events or cadence-based sampling. We have a poll, so for the paradigm where we would like a client to still be able to request when it gets sent data. And then we have a once, which is an efficient way to do a get without requiring the target to be able to marshal all data at once. So essentially you start an iterator and you walk through the tree and you advertise everything that match the paths that you were specified. Streaming data, as I mentioned, can be sampled, so where the device takes a sample every n milliseconds or whatever frequency is specified in the RPC and then sends a value, or it can be unchanged, so that's when the value changes, a notification sent, or a mix of those. So we have this mode called target defined, where basically either the data model or the server implementation determines how best to send a certain leaf. So in that kind of case, if you have a counter, then it's sent as a sampled version. If it's something that's an event based, then the target sends it as an event, and that gives us the most efficient way to be able to choose how to allow the target to choose how to optimize for the tree that it knows about. In GNMI, and particularly for subscriptions, then the target always timestamps the packet. So this gives us the ability to, rather than SNMP where you have, I poll at time X and then I don't know, I get a response at time Y, but I have to assume that the sample came from time X. The timestamp at the device tells you exactly when it was taken, so you know you can continue to build a more accurate graph. And some of our telemetry, it's particularly noticeable when you kind of compare the telemetry data to the SNP data.
Rob Wilson, Cisco, just a quick clarifying question. You said timestamped at target. If you're reading counters from the hardware, is it the timestamp you want the counters read from the hardware you'd expect, or is it when they get put into a message and sent?
No, when it was taken from the hardware. Okay. So it's
when the value changes is effectively when you're looking for.
Sorry.
When the value changes or is read from somewhere is as close to when it actually changes what you're after.
Right. So if you that way, if you have caches inside of a device, you can still maintain the cache, but okay, it was taken at time X, and the client, even whenever the client comes to retrieve it, it's able to determine what when that sample was from. Equally, if you've got leaves that are populated with BGP session that went up or down, if the timestamp is when that happens, so when a new client comes along, it's able to say, okay, this happened, but it happened at time X, many moons ago, rather than it was a new event occurring right then.
Okay, thank you.
We then have two other RPCs, a GET RPC, which is designed to be a snapshot of state at a particular time. It's particularly used for configuration state retrieval, where you want to serialize the configuration into some message and send it to the client. But we've kind of debated, and there's some talk in the specification around the scaling implications of this. If you have a large set of data to be able to serialize, there can be some. It's not as efficient as putting them into these individual notifications where the target's able to choose how to serialize for performance. And then we have a capabilities RPC, which is just used to understand both the encodings. So we support protobuf and ASCII and JSON, as I said, and then the models that the device supports. So this allows you to know what schemas you need to understand.
You mentioned that Yang is not required, so do you have any other means how to communicate the model supported by the target?
Yeah, so we have models that we've written in protobuf. So we have for the encoding efficiency, we actually take a Yang module and we can machine translate it to protobuf. So then that gives us a way to build serialized directly into binary protobuf on the wire. But yeah, then we have parts of the schema that are written just in proto for particular things.
Tim Karinokia, I'm curious, when you say you do the serialization from the Yang into the protobuf, how do you deal with all the semantic elements? Is that taken into account? Because you can't do that in protobuf, right? It's all syntactic.
Right. So the schema is if we have this debate in RTGWG as well. It's for schema validation and for compiling the data tree and validating it, then we do it in data structures that are aware of the Yang. So not in proto. And then we have proto that's then the proto is used in those cases just on the wire.
So it's all syntactic. You lose all the semantics that go into the richness of the Yang, right?
Yeah, so you can, we have libraries that serialize and deserialize from proto back into data structures that are able to do validation.
Yeah, but at that point you lose the richness of the module, or you just reconstitute you assume that's in the definition of the modules, right? Like if you're dealing with the whens and ifs and stuff, so you're trying to reconstitute it at the back end. It's not on the wire. You got to have both ends have to have the Yang.
So I think it was separating the use of proto as a schema language and the proto or Yang as a schema language from a serialization. So we have, if we write a schema in proto, then yes, of course we don't get those things because proto doesn't support that. If we write the schema module in Yang, then as long as there's some code artifact.
You need both ends having the Yang so you can reconstitute the semantics. Okay.
But I mean, particularly for telemetry, we haven't really seen that there's a huge value in having the collector layer have any awareness of the schema because it can't really do anything, right? It's like a value gets sent to you and it doesn't comply with the schema. It's not really like you're not going to say, oh no, that's bad telemetry. Please send me something different. So having that split of not having data structures that are not schema aware in the right places has given us quite a lot of ways to optimize for those high volume cases without having to carry a bunch of metadata around.
Okay.
One of the things that we've tried to do is make the GNMI spec as minimal as possible in terms of having only the things that we think are common across multiple use cases in the spec, and then have this way to extend the protocol. So it's something that can be extended by both the core team as well as just opening a GitHub issue and adding to it. The extensions are carried per message. And we're using them for things like proxying, so where you actually talk to a target through another proxy because it's outside of the same trust domain, or in some cases we have master arbitration between different writers. So two writers do a master election and they want to know which was the latest, only the one with the latest election ID should be allowed to write in a split brain scenario. So these extensions are carried per message, so some of them are relevant obviously to only the set RPC, but they can be carried in any message so that the protocol can be extended. We have both well-known extensions that are which are defined within the spec, as well as registered extensions whereby an ID is assigned to them and the contents are opaque for arbitrary extension. We've tried to keep it such that these are only used where the existing RPC's function is really being extended. It's not new functionality. Or a fundamental change to the RPC, because in that case it's better to run multiple services so that we have a defined expectation. So there's two, so you can run multiple gRPC services on the same port and have these extension RPCs be in this separate service.
If you can speed up, that'd be good.
I think this is my last slide. So the timestamping I've kind of mentioned. This is something that's critical for the fidelity of the telemetry, which is important to us. We've been through a few iterations on encoding of values. So we started out with JSON encoding values and found that this introduced unnecessary complexity because things like integers becoming strings meant that we had to then unmarshal them back into what they should be. So we've now adopted using native protobuf types for the encoding and mapping things like decimal 64, which don't have a protobuf native type, and into specific messages. This was the point that I was making earlier about the on-the-wire efficiency. The volume of data is pretty huge on scale systems, QoS and interfaces. Even just that set of counters is a large amount of data, and things like the BGP rib and device rib end up being large as well. So we've had a couple of approaches, both through prefixing of data, so being able to build a notification that has a common prefix across all the paths in it, and then use of the generated protobufs on the wire as to be able to aggregate sets of data gives you a significant advantage on the wire. And that's turned out to be one of the scaling limits that we found in the system is the amount of data that can be transmitted through the gRPC running on the network devices. Our development approach, I've kind of talked to this. We've got specification that's in GitHub. Then there's reference tool implementations, which we've open sourced. So there's a CLI tool that we use for interacting for device. There's a target. There's a fake to be able to test implementations against it for the device, and telemetry collector implementation is mostly open source. It's almost we're still in the process of getting the last few parts of it out, and we have a reference server implementation as well. And we're starting to also develop a set of compliance tests that will be run that will be open source and published, such that trying to build an ecosystem such that people can actually just download this and run it rather than have the kind of overhead of trying to develop a bunch of things themselves. And here's, for future posterity, a bunch of links to some of the things that I've talked about.
All right, thanks, Rob. We don't have any time for questions. And Alex?
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm Alex Kemp from Huawei. I'm presenting an update basically on a smaller draft comparison of NMDA data stores. Basically, a couple of updates from the last IETF 100, not 101. Basically, again, just to recap, this draft defines basically just one RPC that allows to compare NMDA data stores. Basically, the issue is that given that there are multiple data stores with data values propagating between them, there's the issue what happens basically when, for instance, data values don't propagate correctly or take longer time to propagate. How would you be able to troubleshoot those sorts of things? So basically, for those items, basically, it's convenient to have a comparison or discrepancy detection or diffing basically type of operation. So a couple of, well, we had some discussion on this on the mailer, and based on this, basically we posted it just yesterday, actually a new revision with a number of changes. One thing basically what has changed since Singapore is we added examples into the draft. Also, there was the discussion concerning should this be called discrepancy detection or something else. So basically, we removed the discrepancy detection. Basically, it's now comparison and diffing to make that actually clearer and simpler, if you will. Then there is one feature within this, which was an optional feature before concerning a dampening feature, which basically was intended to report differences only when they persist for a certain amount of time. So you could basically specify that only when you see a difference, don't report it immediately, but only when you see this persisting for some period of time. Feedback was from the was on the mailer to rather basically move this out. So this is basically what we have done actually, right? I still consider this personally actually as an interesting feature, but basically this is now basically put into potential futures. Another feedback was to also mention the possibility of applying an additional pre-filtering step to exclude data from the comparison, which is not within the scope of both data sources. This is now basically also added into the draft. And that's basically pretty much also basically, I guess the things where we are now, basically we need to confirm the removal of the dampening as a feature. I think from the mailing list discussion, it seems that there's basically the consensus of the working group to do that. One other item that should be added, this was based on I forget actually who made the comment, was basically that we need to add a reporting of the origin discrepancy. So basically when there is a difference that is detected, it is useful to include, for instance, in the operational data store, what was the origin of that, which can again help basically explain what is going on. So that is something that will be added. And finally, basically, this is still in the individual draft, but we're hoping, or basically want to ask if this should be adopted by the working group.
Right, and I see Lou getting up. So on the question of workgroup adoption, maybe Lou, you want to say?
Sure. So what new protocol mechanisms are being defined in this document?
Sorry, say again?
What new protocol mechanisms are being defined here?
New protocol.
What you know? This is the. I can actually go to the backup slide. Basically, this is defined as an RPC inside the Yang module.
Okay.
It defines an RPC just to compare. So it applies to anything that you would run Yang RPC with.
All right. Yeah, I think it's a great function. Very interested in it, but it's not clear to me why it's in this group versus netmod, since there's no protocol impact.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'll be more explicit as Lou Berger again. I suggest we bring this into netmod and present it there and ask for adoption there.
Oh, okay.
So I guess the question is which working group should it go to? I think you have a preference for this working group because of all the Yang push and related drafts, but to Lou's point, it may be better suited for that working group.
Oh, that is fine too. I don't think my co-authors, we don't feel strongly either way. So if this should move to netmod, sure. Well, what is the process of doing that? I guess is then the question.
It won't be. Then we won't make the workgroup adoption call.
Okay.
Well, I mean, maybe we could ask the room then. Just a show of hands, who's read the draft? Okay, a fair number. And of that group of people, who believes it should be in this working group versus, or like raise your hand if it should be in this working group? Okay, raise your hand if it should be in the netmod working group. All right, it should go to the netmod working group.
All right, okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And our last one.
Second.
Kent, or chairs, can I ask a question about the last one?
You got 1 minute.
Okay. I'll note that we have time on the agenda in netmod. Shall we take this up in this meeting? Think about it.
I'm Balazs Zenger from Ericsson, and I'm bringing you a little problem that was pushed out of Yang push to make the main drafts progress faster, but is actually part of that problem space. So we have the on-change capability in Yang push, which means that changes will be immediately notified whenever they happen. But we know that implementations will not be capable of sending on-change notification for everything. There are a number of reasons for this. Some objects like counter can change very frequently. Maybe the changes are not meaningful, like a small temperature change. But I think the most important is that maybe it's not always implemented for every object that we monitor it and we immediately notify changes about them. And in some cases, hardware limitations might also play a role. So if I'm on a big router, then I can send notification about any change. If I'm on a small router with limited resources, maybe same models, I can't do that. But practically, this means that although I say I support on-change notifications, specifically, I'm allowed not to send notifications for anything. Right? That means that client and network management system cannot really depend on it because, yeah, maybe this one interesting object was not implemented for on-change notifications. Then how can I use it, really? And NMS applications want to depend on these, so they need to know, will I or will I not get on-change notifications for a specific object or leaf or whatever. So let's document it. And there was a proposal based on Yang extension statements in the Yang push draft that didn't meet with everybody's liking. So the alternative, based on some of these requirements, is to use a Yang module. And the main point here from the requirements is that this information, which specific data nodes will send on exchange notifications, is needed both in implementation time and runtime. Most of the time, a vendor already knows that, yeah, I won't send on-change notification for counters, but I will send on-change notification for, I don't know, configuration, or let's say BGP peers, or changed Yang modules, or changed some other big changes. Also, some of these items, let's say, can be changed also in runtime. Let's say new Yang feature can be switched on in runtime. So then I need to know, and that might mean that I send on-change notifications for different objects. So there is a separate need for implementation time and runtime information about this. So that's why I propose that we use a Yang module to document which objects will send notifications. And with the coming draft that I'll present in another hour about Yang instance data and how to document Yang instance data, that will allow us to have design or implementation time documentation about the same thing. So what I'm really proposing is a Yang module, or that would extend the IETF Yang library that contains these Netconf notification capabilities. It will have a set of data, so default capabilities for each module. Do I send on-change notifications about that module, yes or no? And if there are some specific objects, specific data nodes that behave differently than the Yang module default, then I have a possibility to mark those ones as well in the notification capability list with the node selector and the change notifications. And this last one is just an example of how this would be documented in design time using instance data. So what I'm asking is that we have a problem that needs solution that's already documented in the Yang push draft. And defining a Yang data module for this, a small Yang data module for this, would be a simple solution that supports all the requirements as I see it. So I would like to ask for a work group adoption for this draft.
So I don't think it's appropriate to pull for, I think it's important work. Like you said, it was pushed out of Yang push, but this draft was just submitted end of February, and there hasn't been any discussion on it yet. And also, I believe the set of authors are currently very busy on a number of working group chartered documents that we really should probably see to completion before we bring on any more work to that group of authors. So perhaps we should take this to the list, do some more discussion, and then see a little bit further down the road if we should adopt it.
Actually, we had an offline meeting with those authors, and most of them supported it, so, or actually all of them.
I'm sure they do.
The question is, do they have the bandwidth to actually work on the document?
I expect that I will do the majority of the work, but yeah, that's a question.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Xiao Jianding from Huawei. So I have read the draft. So this draft addressed the problem of identifying which objects on change notification are spot or not. So you said small object changes are frequent and meaningless. I think whether such change is meaningful or not is dependent on the real application and the user needs. So during the real time, the value of object changes frequently might be interested to some users. So what I mean is that for a running system, they may need a switch that unchanged notifications, spot or not, can be switched freely.
I think if it's based on the user, then the user can use the subscription parameters to define it. This is more about, is the node capable at all to send let's say, in octets counter notifications. So it's really server capabilities in this.
Okay. I just wanted to briefly comment regarding the bandwidth. I think this work is, because it was pushed out of Yang push, I consider this still being part of the overall body, therefore responding to the question, do we have the bandwidth? Yeah, I think we'll make the bandwidth.
Jürgen Schönwelder on Jabber has a comment. The question is whether this is the right solution for the problem.
There was a more simple solution with Yang extensions that was not supported. I think this is a good solution for the problem.
Benoit Claes, a contributor. I believe it's a key problem, right? I would like to have unchanged for every single variable I have in a router, even counters, right? Because some of the counters are important. If this is the counters, the number of the reset on a BGP session, I care about that, right? So I think this is a very important work.
So Rob, we've also have the same problem in GNMI and have the solution we've taken is a little different. So we've got a way of annotating in the schema where the expectations to say, okay, this should be sent on change, like the in octets counter. Yeah, probably this shouldn't be sent on change, but BGP peer session state this should be sent on change. But we haven't got the sort of the proposal you have here of open the RPC and but just don't conform to some of the request of the client. We don't take. Basically, if you try and have an unchanged subscription to a leaf or to a set of leaves where it's not possible for the device to do it, it just fails the subscription. And we have this target defined mode that says the client actually doesn't mind how it's sent. And that the problem here is that you enter a whole world of complexity if you accept a subscription where you can't actually meet the request. So it leaves a whole load of compliance and of functionality to sort of undefined in the implementation. So I kind of prefer the approach of failing. If you ask for a subscription that the node isn't able to honor, just failing and not opening the RPC at all and not starting streaming.
Originally, information was in the schema, but not everyone liked that. Then some people said that this may change runtime, which objects I support or I don't support. So.
Absolutely. So the annotation in the schema is really to say what's the practical, like what's the recommendation or what's the way that the schema that knows about this data should send it. The bigger question I have is whether you want to go to this complexity of accepting an RPC that you can't actually honor the parameters of. Because that's what you're talking about here. You're saying someone asked for unchange and you can't actually do it.
Not really, because what I'm saying is that I accept, let's say, the subscription request for everything, but you have to understand that when I say everything, then I mean everything with these exceptions. So I'm limiting already what I'm promising you.
But then the contract of the RPC is not, so the way that we've solved this is to have this target defined mode, which says, actually as the client, I'm going to let you choose how to do it. And then you based on the knowledge of the implementation, which doesn't have to be communicated and in-band to the protocol, say what you're expecting. If I specifically ask for an on-change subscription to a leaf, so let's say I try and subscribe to this in octets counter just on change, I'm going to subscribe. You're never going to send me anything. It probably was better to just not accept the subscription. So it was very clear to the consuming system that the device wasn't able to honor the contract.
Last question.
So Rob Wilson, Cisco, it's actually a question for Rob. So what happens if you can generate the on-change subscription, the notifications, but you've got some quantizing happening? So you might only be able to generate a notification, say, every 50 milliseconds. So how do you get that information to the client that you can do on-change, but you can't do on-change on every event? There's some limitations to that.
So the thing we've asked a lot when we add things to GNMI is, what is the client going to do? So if you communicate that to the client, it's like, oh, it hasn't got anything it can do about it. That's all you can really do. So there's no real need to have that in the protocol.
It is more so that they're aware of what service they're actually signing up for.
Does that have to be validated at this time? Like how does it actually react to it? So that's a system design time implementation, right? Implication. So we don't need to carry all the implications, the considerations that the system design had to have in the protocol. The protocol doesn't essentially need to carry that.
Actually, this is no small part about system design, because we said that the implementation time information is needed as well. And this is the way actually to provide that one too.
The implementation time thing, I think, is definitely a good idea to have. I'm just not sure that it's required at runtime.
All right. I think we are anyway over time. So this essentially closes the Netconf session.
Yeah. No. Okay. How long is the break?
20 minutes.
Okay, yeah, so the NetMod session starts in 18 minutes.
Here or somewhere else?
No, it's in Brio.
Yeah. Should be.
Yeah, the NetMod session is in Blenheim. Thanks to the right. Okay. Grab all this stuff. That stays there. Can you put that into the clicker? Yeah. Hey, what's up? Yeah.